Science has come a full circle. Once we explained the universe as clockwork, because Newtonian physics was all we had. Then we discovered a brave new world inside the atom, but still relied on computation and logic. Now Penrose is convinced that we must make another Einstein-like leap beyond the limits of our current science if we want to find our souls.
Well, I have a much stronger reason for believing that at least some of our conscious activity is not the result of computation. And this comes from certain very precise theorems in mathematical logic, which basically tell you that there are proved to be things within mathematics which are outside computation.
This conflicts with one of the deepest assumptions of Western science, which is that all truths are logically connected, and therefore our minds discover these truths in logical, computable steps. Greg Chaitin's work is in the process of sweeping all of this away.
I was always interested in crazy ideas. As a child, it was magic. Magic stories that interested me as a very small child. It was the notion that everyday normal reality, the reality of normal appearances, isn't the real reality, that there is something behind it, something that transcends our normal reality. And that's an impulse which can lead to religion or can lead to science. The old view was that there were a few principles that all mathematicians could agree on, very simple, self-evident truths. And from this, you can systematically deduce things that aren't self-evident. And Gödel in 1931 pulled out the rug from under this view, showing that there would always be mathematical truths that escaped, that somehow you couldn't get to. I'm trying to understand if the cases where mathematical reasoning fails, if the problems that escape our ability as mathematicians are unusual, or if they're everywhere, if we're likely to be stumbling them on them all the time without realizing it. And my work tends to suggest that the problem is much more serious. I found accidental mathematical facts, mathematical truths which are true for no reason, which are true by accident. It's as if pure mathematics, or God in the world of mathematics, is just tossing a coin. And that's not supposed to happen. You see, you have all of mathematical truth, this ocean of mathematical truth. And this ocean has islands, an island here, algebraic truths, an island here, arithmetic truths, an island here of the calculus. And these are different fields of mathematics where all the ideas are interconnected in ways that mathematicians love. They fall into nice interconnected patterns. But what I've discovered is there's all this sea around these islands. The sea is full of little points where individual atomic mathematical facts which have no connection with any island. It's just one molecule, one atom of mathematical truth.
While logic prevails within each island, the mystery that fascinates Chaitin is how the human brain gets from one island to another, if not by logic.
If we're trying to get to this information, if we're trying to learn more mathematics, if we're trying to come up with new mathematical concepts, the question is, how can we do it? Where does this come from? You don't get it mechanically by reasoning based on what you already know, because in a sense, that doesn't get you anything new.
Doesn't get you off your island.
That's right. You stay in the same island. I mean, you can do a lot of beautiful mathematical theories that way, but now we know that there are certain limitations, that you're stuck.
Chaitin's work has been catastrophic for the traditional view of mathematics. But an even more profound challenge is to the dominant role of the left, the reasoning side of our brain. For if mathematical truths are not linked by logic, then the mind can't be getting from one to another by using it. This means there has to be some other hugely powerful part of the brain that is completely unlike the left hemisphere.
The normal view of how the mind works, the rational view of how the mind works, is that when you're thinking, you are making deductions. It's that it's a symbolic process of reasoning, of using logic step by step. This is the idea that thinking is mathematical, that thinking is logical. And my impression is that this tells us something about the mind, all this work on the foundations of mathematics. And what it tells us is that logic can only be a part of it. And I think if you ask, the person in the street, they'll say, logic is a very small part of human existence. And mathematicians and philosophers following Plato probably took reasoning and logic a little too seriously. I mean, I love reasoning and logic. I'm a mathematician. But in a way, mathematics is finally forced to confront its own limitations and is even underlining and proving that this view has certain limitations and that there has to be more there.
What that more is, we do not yet fully understand. But a scientist's description of what it's like in action can sound more like revelation than reason.
It's imagination. Now, I'm not saying that it's unfettered imagination. I don't know where ideas come from. I can only look back at my own experience creating a new mathematical theory and say, I don't know where it comes from. I don't do it mechanically. Most people think mathematicians, are like machines. We sit down with a piece of paper, we're dull, unemotional people, and you calculate. But the truth is, at least for me, mathematics isn't that way at all. It's very emotional. And you have these wild ideas, you have these intuitions, and thoughts come to you. Sometimes it's an extremely intense experience. I'm talking about moments where you get an idea for a whole new theory or something really major. And I've often compared this to climbing on top of a mountain. And you get to the top, and everything seems so clear and bright. And I think it's definitely a different kind of a mental state, because my mind seems much sharper. This usually goes on for a certain period, and it's not just for my mathematical work. My mind seems sharper, and I seem more perceptive about everything. I seem to be in some kind of a highly energized or more perceptive state, and it's a wonderful state to be in. It doesn't last long usually.
How does it feel?
It feels wonderful. My normal self. It's unpleasant then to go back to being your normal self. Like it's unpleasant when you've been at the top of a mountain, and the air is so beautiful, dark blue, and you can see forever. It's very unpleasant going back down into the soupy, dirty air.
The irony of Chaitin's work is that he is using the tools of advanced mathematics to prove that mysteries like inspiration and insight must be real, that they come to us from outside the self and the logic of the left hemisphere, and correspond to how artists describe the thing we all have at times: inspiration.
There's this kind of deep cave at the back of the head, and what we're doing when we're writing is bringing a feeling, an inarticulate feeling, more nearly towards the front of our minds, and as it approaches the front of our minds, words begin to attach themselves to it. So writing, making something, starts with an inchoate feeling, strictly a feeling. And what you end up with in the poem is a kind of washing line on which the words are hanging, and those words both describe, as nearly as they can, though they never do it adequately, this thing which is in the back of your head and that you're trying to bring forward. And that inarticulate back of the mind feeling is where soul lives. Oddly, while that's actually going on, I think you are largely unconscious. While we're actually on the job, if you like, actually with our hands on the page writing the thing, or painting it, or doing the complicated mathematical equation, or whatever it might be, that we are sort of blank to ourselves, but that when we've done it and seen how it's worked, if it's worked well, then you can see that that's what's happened. I think it is my experience that I'm in a sense blank to myself. It's only later that I can see it. In other words, once again, I can't report on it exactly.
This strange absence of self in the creative and intuitive process echoes the Buddhist belief that the non-self is more important than the self of the left hemisphere. Some Western mind scientists are trying to marry these strands together to reach a better definition of what makes us who we are.
There is a certain feeling on the part of the self that everything interesting that goes on, everything that is done, every behavioral decision is made by the self. But I think in an important way, the bit of the brain that does the talking isn't the part of the brain where the most interesting things occur. My own view is that the moments of insight or creativity, which I find most interesting, are those which are probably happening far off somewhere in the parts of my brain where I'm simply not aware of them until they bubble up as an almost completed thought or a partial insight, which I may then be able to sharpen or hone through the part of me that does the talking, as it were. When those two are combined, you get something very powerful.
The brain, there's the part of the brain that leads to bridge building and computers, and unfortunately accounting and inland revenue and the complications of the legal system. And then there's the part of the brain that has poetry and art and perhaps religion or spirituality, if you have those feelings, you know, that deals with art galleries, the part of you that falls in love, the modern world, modern education has trained us to emphasize this part of our personality, the rational part, the reasoning part, the mechanical part in a way. It's done great things. You have bridges and computers and modern technology, but I think this part is even more wonderful. You need them both.
Certainly there's an important role for the self, otherwise it wouldn't have evolved in the first place. But it didn't evolve to create brilliant insights or music or art or poetry. It evolved to do more mundane things like identifying food and communicating efficiently with other members of our species. So it's not surprising that the self, which is doing these more mundane activities, but doing it in particularly efficient and highly effective ways, it's no surprise that that self isn't the same thing which produces the brilliant insights or the moments of creativity.
Consciousness, by this definition, is that other thing. Not just being alive, but those things we have always felt the soul gave us. Inspiration and insight beyond logic. Roger Penrose is not religious, and he does not believe in an immortal soul. But his search has taken him very close to the language of religion.
Well, as a scientific problem, the consciousness problem is the more profound, because we have no clue. Whereas the embellishments of that problem, if you like, and the sort of self-reflective aspect you can't even get started on until you've got consciousness there in the first place. The consciousness is a gift. You can think of it that way, perhaps. Consciousness is a gift in the sense that, well, we wouldn't be here without it, and it's given to us. What I mean is that, you know, we come into this world and we seem to possess this thing of consciousness. Whereas the ability to reflect on one's own consciousness is something you've done yourself. You've thought about this. You've thought this through, in a sense. I mean, if you were a deity trying to design a universe, what ingredients would you have to put into that design for a universe in order that these beings in it actually have consciousness? We haven't the remotest clue.
I think that the science of the future, which is going to deal with complex systems, not with the hydrogen atom or the solar system, it's going to deal with things like us, hopefully, if we're lucky and we get to understand that, is going to deal with the notion of information as an absolutely fundamental notion. And I think the soul, if there is such a thing, I think is probably closer to information than it is to traditional physics that thinks about matter.
Faced with a gap in our knowledge, whether it's the missing physics of the atom or the missing element in our understanding of consciousness, one recourse is to do better science. Bad science is to say because your theory can't contain it, it can't exist. And soul is the word that has always reminded us that we are larger than any theory.